They say every comic has a cover, but not every story stays inside the lines. Some are too dark for the ink, and some are too loud for the speech bubbles. My name is Aaron, and this is my collection of the things that shouldn't exist. You've reached the bottom of the bin, where the back issues have a life of their own. This is Tales from the Shortbox. In the world of collectibles, we're obsessed with the grade. We want a 10, the flawless, the peak of human achievement. But brilliance always has a price, and sometimes the tuition is higher than you can afford. Tonight, we're visiting a town where every student is a prodigy and every test is aced. But if you look closely at the honor roll, you notice it's written in the ink of the departed. Grab your notebook and take a seat. Class is in session. This is the root of knowledge. The town of Oakhaven looked like it had been painted by Norman Rockwell and then left to ripen in the sun. White picket fences, perfect green lawns, and a red brick schoolhouse that rose like a small cathedral at the center of town. When Clara Turner drove her battered Honda across the town line, she felt something loosen in her chest for the first time in years. At 29, Clara was a cryptolinguist, a scholar of lost languages, forgotten codes, and hidden patterns that live between the words. She had spent most of her adult life alone with dusty manuscripts and half-deciphered tablets. Friends were few, family even fewer. When the offer from Oakhaven Academy arrived, a generous salary, housing, and a promise of brilliant students, it felt like fate. Principal Whitaker met her not on the front steps, but inside his wood-paneled office at the end of the main hall. The room smelled of lemon polish and old paper. He poured her a cup of tea from a silver service that looked as though it had been in the school since the founding. "Welcome to Oakhaven, Dr. Turner," he said, sliding a cup across the desk with grandfatherly warmth. His silver hair caught the light from the tall window behind him. His eyes, however, catalogued everything. "Our children are exceptional. We think you'll find them quite receptive to your particular talents." Clara sipped the tea, chamomile with an undertone of something sharper, almost metallic, and felt a flicker of pride. It had been years since anyone needed her expertise this badly. Whitaker leaned back, folding his hands. "I should be honest with you about your predecessor, Mr. Reginald Henderson. Brilliant man, truly, but he suffered a rather sudden mental decline toward the end. Paranoia, scribbled notes, that sort of thing. Heartbreaking, really. The children adored him, of course, but the strain of the curriculum finally caught up with him." He slid a manila folder across the desk. Inside were photocopies of pages covered in frantic handwriting, symbols, crossed-out phrases, and what looked like fragments of an unknown cipher. "We'd like you to review these," Whitaker continued smoothly. "Henderson left the curriculum in something of a tangle. The town council is eager to ensure the children don't fall behind. Your background in cryptolinguistics makes you the perfect person to untangle it. Think of it as a little welcome to Oakhaven project." Clara's pulse quickened with professional excitement. This wasn't just a teaching job. They needed her. Really needed her. She smiled, already imagining the intellectual challenge. "I'd be honored, Mr. Whitaker. I'll start right away." He returned the smile, but it never quite reached his eyes. "Excellent. And Dr. Turner, if you come across anything unusual in those notes, please bring it straight to me. We wouldn't want any misunderstandings to take root here." Clara's classroom was bright and airy, with tall windows overlooking a central courtyard. In the middle of that courtyard stood the tree. It was breathtaking. The trunk was smooth and bone white. The leaves had a deep bruised purple that caught the light like stained glass. The apples hanging from its branches were a red so vivid they almost glowed. Perfect, unblemished, and possibly symmetrical. A brass plaque at the base read simply, "Alethea tree, planted 1897. Clara felt a chill crawl up her spine the first time she saw it. Something about the tree felt too aware, like it was listening. The students were even more unsettling. On her first day, 8-year-old Stephanie corrected Clara's pronunciation of a 14th century Aramaic dialect with casual precision, then smiled as if she'd merely pointed out a smudge on the chalkboard. A 10-year-old boy named Carter solved a cryptographic puzzle Clara had designed for graduate students in under 4 minutes, his small fingers moving with eerie confidence across the page. They weren't just bright, they were uncanny, almost preternaturally focused. Their eyes held a quiet hunger that made the hair on Clara's arms rise. Over the next 3 days, the classroom began to feel like a puzzle box designed only for her. On day 1, while reviewing the daily reading list left by Henderson, Clara noticed something odd. The first letters of each assigned poem spelled out a faint acrostic, "Look behind the dates." She dismissed it as coincidence. On day 2, while erasing the historical timeline border that ran along the top of the chalkboard, she realized the dates weren't random. Subtle shifts in the numerals formed a simple Caesar cipher, +3. When she mentally applied it, the phrase, "the roots remember," appeared in the margin where the chalk had been heaviest. Her pulse ticked up a notch. She told herself it was just an old teacher's game. By day 3 after the final bell, Clara stayed late. The school was quiet except for the soft creak of the building settling. She measured the timeline border with a ruler she'd borrowed from the supply closet, then pulled specific books from the shelves exactly where the cipher pointed: a 1912 Latin primer, a faded copy of The Golden Bough, and a slim volume on medieval steganography. Each book's spine, when pressed in sequence, produced a tiny metallic click. Behind the chalkboard, a narrow panel slid aside. Beneath it, in the narrow space between the board and the wall, lay a loose floorboard. Clara pried it up with a letter opener. Inside the dusty cavity rested a small leather journal. The name embossed on the cover in faded gold was Mr. Reginald Henderson. She carried it back to the town-provided cottage that evening, heart hammering with the thrill of discovery. This was why she had come. This was the kind of mystery she lived for. That night, and for the next 3 nights, Clara barely slept. She spread the journal across her dining table, surrounded by empty coffee mugs and sheets of graph paper covered in translation matrices. Henderson had written in a fiendishly complex, multi-layered code, a visionaire cipher, wrapped around a book code reference to the 1897 school charter, with an additional substitution layer based on a periodic table of elements. It was the kind of encryption only another cryptolinguist would bother to crack. She worked by the light of a single lamp, the rest of the cottage dark. Outside, the wind moved through the purple leaves of the alethea tree in the school courtyard 2 blocks away. Though she couldn't see it from her window, she could feel it anyway. The first legible fragment came at 2:17 a.m. on the second night. The roots are thirsty. Clara stared at the words until they blurred. Thirsty for what? Water? Knowledge? She poured another cup of coffee and kept going. By the 3rd night, more pieces emerged, each one colder than the last. 12 before me, all crossed out. The tree keeps count. Then, scrawled in a hand that had clearly been shaking, they watched the tree too closely. Stephanie asked me today if I had ever tasted the fruit. The children are growing faster than they should. I asked Whitaker about the fertilizer. He only smiled. Clara's hand trembled as she wrote the final translation on a fresh sheet. The last page of the journal contained a list of names, 12 names, each crossed out with a neat line. All previous teachers at Oakhaven Academy. All dead within 1 year of arrival. Heart attacks, suicides, one tragic accident on the highway out of town. She closed the journal, heart pounding. She looked out her cottage window toward the school, where one perfect red apple hung low on the branch of the alethea tree, swaying gently, though there was no wind. The next morning, during independent work time, Clara sat at her desk pretending to grade papers while she wrestled with the final stubborn section of Henderson's cipher. The symbols refused to yield. 10-year-old Carter wandered over, notebook in hand. Without being asked, he leaned in and doodled a single symbol in the margin of her scratch paper, the exact missing decryption key she had been hunting for 3 nights. Clara froze. Carter, where did you learn that symbol? The boy looked up at her with calm, ancient eyes. I don't know, Miss Turner. I just remembered it after lunch. He smiled the same small, hungry smile all the children wore. The apples are really good this year. Clara's blood turned to ice. That night, she called her only real friend, an old grade school colleague, and left a voicemail. Hey, it's Clara. I think I might have made a mistake coming here. The kids are too smart. Call me when you get this. She never received a reply. On her 10th day in Oakhaven, Mr. Whitaker caught Clara after the final bell and extended a warm invitation. There's a special welcoming ceremony tonight under the alethea tree, he said, his grandfatherly smile never wavering. It's tradition for all our finest teachers. The children look forward to it. They see it as a way of welcoming new knowledge into the fold. Clara forced a polite nod, but her stomach had already twisted into knots. She had spent the previous nights poring over Henderson's journal, translating its layered ciphers by the harsh light of her cottage lamp. The fragments she had uncovered, the roots are thirsty, 12 before me, they watched the tree too closely, played on an endless loop in her mind. She had begun noticing other things, how the townspeople aged with unnatural grace, remaining sharp and vital well into their 80s and 90s, how the children's brilliance seemed to sharpen after certain school events, their eyes gleaming with borrowed depth. She smiled back at Whitaker. I'll think about it. She had already decided she would not attend. Instead, as evening deepened into true night, Clara slipped into the darkened second-floor library. The room smelled of old paper and lemon polish. Tall windows overlooked the central courtyard and the bone-white tree below. She left the lights off, letting the moonlight paint long, stretching shadows across the shelves. The hours until midnight stretched like slow torture. She could not simply wait. While the clock on the wall ticked with agonizing patience, Clara used her cryptolinguist skills to dig through Miss Eleanor Graves' old library records. She cross-referenced faded card catalogs, yellow ledgers, and handwritten accession notes. What she found chilled her more than the journal ever had. No one in Oakhaven ever truly left. Birth records showed tight interlocking bloodlines, but they were artificial, carefully curated. Teachers arrived from outside, stayed 1 year, and then vanished from the rolls. The brilliant families of the town council traced their intellectual lineage not through blood, but through the tree. Generation after generation, knowledge was not inherited, it was harvested. Around 11:30 p.m., Clara's trembling fingers found a brittle 1923 pamphlet tucked behind a false panel in one of the archive drawers. Its title, printed in faded ink, read, "A Brief History of the Alethea Tree and Its Gifts to Our Community." She read by the thin moonlight, heart hammering. In 1897, the founders planted something they did not fully understand. Dr. Ebenezer Hawthorne had smuggled the seed from the Old World, the last surviving sprout of the ancient grove of Dodonia. Oracles once spoke with the voices of the gods, Alethea, truth without veil, unconcealedness. The Greeks had feared it, the Romans had burned every grove they found. Hawthorne saw only opportunity, a tree whose fruit could unconceal the hidden mind. The tree took root unnaturally fast. Children who tasted its apples began speaking forgotten language and solving problems no adult could. But the town charter hid the darker truth. The tree did not create knowledge, it transferred it. The first teacher, Miss Nellie Parker, was found at the base of the tree one October morning in 1922, mouth stained crimson, eyes empty. The pattern repeated. 12 teachers before Henderson, all natural causes, all drained so the town could remain brilliant. The pamphlet ended with a single underlined sentence. The roots remember, they are always thirsty for fresh soil. Clara's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the pages. The agonizing tick of the library clock filled the silence. Shadows from the tree below stretched longer across the courtyard as midnight approached. At exactly 12, the townspeople gathered. The entire town council formed a solemn circle beneath the bone-white branches. In the center stood Miss Eleanor Graves, the kind, elderly librarian Clara had spoken with only once. The woman looked confused, almost sleepy, as though she had been gently drugged. "We thank you for your long service, Eleanor," Whitaker said softly, his voice carrying clearly through the open window. "Your knowledge has ripened beautifully over these many years." They led Miss Eleanor Graves to the base of the Alethea tree and gently pressed her back against the smooth, bone-white trunk. She did not resist. She only gasped once, eyes fluttering, as if she were remembering something wonderful and then letting it go. The tree responded. Its pale trunk began to glow from within, a soft, living pulse that spread upward like sap rising. Thin, white rootlets, fine as veins, stirred at the base and crept slowly across the ground before sliding up her arms and neck, slipping beneath her collar and into her hair with delicate, almost tender precision. The bruised purple leaves shivered, though there was no wind. Clara pressed her hand over her mouth. The transfer was not silent. As the glow intensified, whispers rose on the night air, the sound of pages turning, old conversations echoing, mathematical equations dissolving into static. Fragments of Miss Graves' lifetime of quiet scholarship leaked into the courtyard like a dying radio signal. A childhood poem recited in perfect Latin, the precise Dewey Decimal for an obscure cryptography text, the soft laughter of a long-dead husband. Each memory was being pulled, cataloged, and fed downward through the living roots into the heart of the tree. New apples swelled on a low branch, growing heavy and impossibly red in a matter of seconds, the skin glistening as though they now carried every secret Miss Graves had ever guarded. Clara watched the exact moment the light left the old woman's eyes. The intelligence that had defined her for 80 years simply hollowed out. What remained was an empty, vacant shell, still breathing but no longer there. It terrified Clara more than any physical death could have. This was not murder, this was erasure. The perfect, final unconcealing. They weren't just killing Miss Graves, they were feeding her to the tree and harvesting her life experiences and knowledge. A floorboard creaked behind Clara. She turned with a start. Mr. Whitaker stood in the library doorway, silver hair glowing faintly in the moonlight. Several council members stood behind him, calm and unhurried. Don't be frightened, Clara, he said kindly. You have so much to give our children. You are the most fruitful candidate we've had in a generation. A cryptolinguist with almost no living family, few friends, a history of quiet isolation. When your time comes, no one will look too hard. Clara ran. She sprinted down the echoing hallway, shoes slapping against polished wood. The council members followed at a measured pace. No need to rush. They knew the front gate was now chained with heavy iron. They were simply herding her. She ducked into the science lab, heart pounding, and hid under a row of desks. Footsteps passed outside, calm, polite. She slipped out again, weaving through the dark corridors, past lockers that seemed to lean in like silent judges. Every creak of the old building sounded like laughter. They funneled her back toward her own classroom. Clara burst inside and slammed the door, throwing the lock with shaking hands. Her eyes darted around the room for anything she could use as a weapon. On her desk sat the heavy brass bell she used to call the class to order. Outside the door, small footsteps approached, slow, patient, and polite. Then came the sound, the wet, crisp crunch of 20 children biting into apples at exactly the same moment. Clara gripped the brass bell tightly, knuckles white. The footsteps stopped right outside her door. The handle began to turn. From the other side, 20 small voices spoke in perfect unison, but not in their own voices. They spoke in the warm, gentle tones of Miss Eleanor Graves, reciting her deepest, most private memories with eerie sweetness. On my 7th birthday, my father read me the Odyssey by the fireplace. I still remember the exact inflection he used on the polytropos. I never told anyone about the letter I wrote to my husband that night before he died. The Dewey Decimal for forgotten ciphers is 652.8. Stephanie's face appeared at the narrow window in the door, smiling with genuine affection. Miss Turner, she said softly, still in Miss Gray's voice, you don't have to be scared. The tree only takes what's ready, and you're so full of beautiful words. Clara backed away until her spine hit the far wall. The handle turned again, slowly, patiently. The children waited outside like perfect, hungry students ready for their next lesson. Knowledge is power, but in Oakhaven, knowledge is a crop that has to be harvested. They don't believe in the slow climb of education. They believe in the efficiency of the feast. Clara Turner wasn't just a teacher. She was a specialized vintage, a collection of codes and ciphers meant to be tasted and shared. Her brilliance wasn't meant for the chalkboard. It was meant for the core. If you ever find a town where the children are too smart and the garden is too perfect, check the soil. Some roots are white because they've been bleached by the ghosts of those who came before. We're filing this one away under required reading. Until next time, keep your secrets close and your curiosity guarded. This has been Tales from the Shortbox.